What's up guys, it's Bo here again, and in this entry on this fine day I want to talk to you guys about the topics of shadow work and inner child work, right? And those two together form the overall process of emotional healing. And emotional healing is a central process, and it's a very important practice for those who want to achieve greater awareness and want to strive towards enlightenment, right? So if you watch any of my previous entries, I talk about the importance of tapping into your sensitivity, right? In a society, in a world that continually pushes us towards being more in our heads, being more analytical, right? And basically throwing away that side of us that is felt, I teach about the importance of tapping back into that sensitivity so that we become back in tune with what nature gave us. That tool with which to experience life more deeply, right? And with that comes a greater degree of self-awareness. And with that self-awareness, we become better positioned to leading lives which are centered around greater happiness, around pursuits that we are more passionate about. And in general, from heightened sensitivity, we develop a sense of greater peace, with both with ourselves and with the world, right? So very important. And shadow work and inner child work are two very important processes that you can use towards that, right? So what is shadow work? What is inner child work? Well, firstly, shadow work is essentially working with shadow motivations, right? So you may remember in a previous video, if you watched, I talked about the difference between shadow motivations and light motivations, right? And basically, a shadow motivation is a motivation. It is when you engage yourself in an activity or an action that where you feel disconnected and fearful, right? Or you feel obligated to do that thing. So it's not something that you do because you want to do it, but it's because you feel obligated to do it. Contrasting with a light motivation, which is something you do where you feel, loving and connected, right? So shadow work is essentially taking shadow motivations and transforming them into light motivations, right? And then there's inner child work, right? And inner child work is distinct from shadow work. I myself tend to kind of jumble them together because I'm kind of lazy, and I generally use them both to mean emotional healing, but inner child work is distinct from shadow work in that it emotional triggers, right? So an emotional trigger is a spike in negative emotions that you feel under certain circumstances. So for example, someone says something that offends you, someone does something that offends you, something happens that upsets you. That place of upset, like that spike in negative emotion when you're offended by someone or something, is an emotional trigger, right? And that's what spiritual people mean when they talk about triggers, I've been triggered kind of thing, right? And then both lead into the emotional healing process, where with the shadow work you look at the shadow motivation behind the problem area, the addiction, the self-destructive behavior, and in an inner child work the emotional trigger, and then you look to transform and to heal those aspects, right? And essentially, what is behind so what forms the issues behind shadow work and inner child work is essentially what we were conditioned with when we were children, right? Hence inner child. When we were kids, we were basically taught, we were conditioned by our parents and by society at large that certain aspects of us, certain actions, certain expressions, and certain desires are wrong, right? They're unacceptable. And so what we do as children is we suppress those aspects of ourselves, and those suppressed aspects are ultimately what end up forming the shadow, right? Our shadow sides. And this obviously leads, as when we become adults, into problems manifesting in our lives, right? And then triggers, emotional triggers, is what arise when we encounter situations in life that remind us of when we were children and those times when we were vulnerable. when we have the pain of having to suppress those sides of ourselves and feeling powerless to fulfill a need, an emotional need, right? That is what happens when we're triggered, right? And so basically, with shadow work and inner child work, we're looking to identify those triggers and those shadows, and then working through them, identifying the emotions behind them, and then healing them by going through the process of emotional healing, right? And I'm going to go into the, just a brief description of how the practical application of these processes is in just a minute. So I just wanted to say one thing, which is that emotional healing, the reason why it's something that's not very talked about, right? Because even in such a field as spirituality, right, where you'd think that people would talk more openly about these things, and to an extent there is, and also fields like medicine, psychology, is because the emotional healing process is a very kind of, it's not a very kind of prescribable process, right? It's something that's very unique to the individual, right? And emotions as a whole, they're very kind of unpredictable, right? It's not something where it's like, here's a pill that I can prescribe to you, take it and you'll feel better, or do these things and you will feel better. Because if you try to do that with someone with emotional problems, then you can never tell what's going to happen, right? It might work for the person, it might not work for that person, right? And it's important to stress that it is personal to the person, right? So a trigger, for example, is personal to the person, and anything can be a trigger, right? Even the most objectively innocuous thing, such as someone like sneezing, or someone saying like this, like a certain turn of phrase or something, or something, or like on a particular day or something like that. It doesn't matter. Like if that person has a trigger associated with that symbol, that symbolic action, that symbolic event, then they're triggered, right? So it's not right for us to judge that person. We don't have we don't have the right to judge that person because we don't understand where they're coming from. We don't share the same trigger. In the same way that we may have triggers that other people don't understand. So so other people might judge us harshly for something that they don't understand, in terms of why we're doing that thing. We can't judge other people. So, this is why it's difficult if you have like an addiction or something like that, or you have some kind of strange mental illness. And people like to think of mental illnesses as these weird things, but really it's just someone's particular emotional wounds that they picked up when they were kids, right? And it's not something that you have the right to judge unless you explore that emotional wound together with that person and then fully understand it in that way, right? So anything can be a trigger, anything can be people. You can't assume that people have the same emotional issue that's fueling a particular action. So for example, you can't say that two people who have a gambling problem are doing it for the same reasons. Like they could be doing it for completely different motivations, right? So this is something very important to keep in mind. It's something that's very personal, right? So having explained that, I'll now go into the practical, how do we practice shadow work and inner child work, right? Well, with shadow work, as a starter, the first thing we do is we come with the problem area. We have a problem, we want to solve it, right? We have an addiction, we have some kind of problem with not being able to connect with other people, we have some kind of irrational fear, and basically we explore it, so we immerse ourselves in it, right? And the most important thing is to start to identify. Well, the first thing is to start to recognize when it's happened, to become aware of it, right? So become aware of when you are succumbing to this addiction, this problem, and then every time it happens, you think, it's happening, right? So you develop awareness of that thing, and you anchor it to symbolic words, symbolic imagery. You associate it with something to help you become aware of that particular the problem, right? And then the next important thing is to start to recognize how it makes you feel, right? because how it makes you feel is of utmost importance, because how you feel essentially is what is fueling the problem, right? It is an emotional problem, right? This is emotional healing. So you have to focus on how it feels. Focus on the emotions, you know, what does it make you feel? Does it make you feel angry? Does it make you feel jealous? Does it make you feel scared? You know, start to think about that, right? Identify the emotions behind the problem area, right? And then once you develop an awareness of both, like, so you start to become aware of when it happens, when you get that, when the shadow motivation starts to kick in, and then how you feel about it, then you can start to basically undergo the healing process, which involves basically initially kind of logicking, going through the problem logically, you know. So going back to the identification of the motivation, becoming aware of it, a lot of the times this is quite difficult, because you want to get to basically understanding the emotional state behind the problem, right? But a lot of the times that's pretty elusive, right? So you need to start with something tangible. So that's why you focus on events, you focus on images, you focus on language, right? And another good way, which Teal Swan, by the way, the spiritual catalyst, she's basically someone who is like shadow work is and inner child work are basically, like, shadow work is basically her central kind of area of expertise. Like, that's the service that she provides to people. What she does is she asks people how they feel in their body. So she starts with bodily sensations and then moves towards the emotion behind it, right? Because people, it's more easy to communicate how you feel in your body. So, you know, what do you feel in your body? Like, do you feel any pains when you start to crave something, you know, or you know, you get triggered or something like that, which is in the child work, which I'll move in a second. But yeah. And another thing that's important to note, so that's the overall process. But then with emotional healing, emotional healing tends to happen, well, first off, you might not hit the core issue straight away, right? Because a lot of the times, the way that our emotions work, the way that the emotional body works, is that it forms layers of protection, right? So basically the most vulnerable core issue is at the center, and then wrapped around that is layers of emotional security systems, basically security layers. So you might hit, you know, a few security layers, and they will basically spawn an emotion within you, but they aren't the core emotional issue, right? You need to work through these layers, which are protecting, you know, the vulnerable center, the core issue, and keep working until you get to that place of vulnerability, the place that you were trying to protect all along, and the other layers were just defense mechanisms, right? So you need to keep at it until you hit the central issue, right? And the deeper you go as well, interestingly, you'll start to recognize that there's generally one core issue that basically is behind all of your issues in life, right? There's one core imprint, as some people call it. So, like Teal Swan, she talked about this idea of having a core imprint, like a core negative imprint, which is like the core emotional state or issue that basically fuels all these other problem areas in your life, right? So yeah, so that's if you want to go to the very depths, and obviously that will be, if you identify that, then you'll know that is, you know, the area that you really need to focus on. But and then you undergo the healing process. So I'll just go over inner child work. Inner child work is, as I said, dealing with emotional triggers, right? So so you get triggered, right? And this may happen at any time. You get triggered, and basically, you first off develop awareness on why you're being triggered. So when are you being triggered? Who's triggering you? Under what circumstances are you being triggered? And you develop an awareness around that trigger, right? And then, of course, you delve into the feeling. You identify how you feel when you're triggered, right? And then you you start to think about earlier times when you were triggered, right? So all of these basically lead back to a time in the past where all of these triggers originate from, right? And this may go all the way back to childhood, and it very likely will. There was a time in your childhood where this response was installed in you, and you go back to that time, and basically then you start the emotional healing process, which is slightly different from the child work. Basically what happens is you put yourself in a situation of the initial trigger, or whichever time that the trigger was strongest, and you play it through, but you change your role in the unfolding of the events in that situation. So if you were a child and you were shouted at for something, and now you've got a trigger when people criticize you, you go back to once you've identified the first time it happened, you go back to that time, and then you play it through your head, and you basically stand up for yourself. So you just say, well, I did this for these reasons. I did this because I thought it was right. I do this because I have a right to do this. I have a right to be angry. I didn't mean to hurt you, but I don't think you should be shouting at me because I don't think it's right. And you basically you play the parents, like the parent that stands up for you. So you have good parent, bad parent, and the bad parents were your original parents. But you play the good parent, which stands up for your inner child, right? And then slowly, this coupled with basically just greater awareness in general about the triggers themselves and the emotional state that you're in when you experience these triggers, you'll slowly start to loosen the grip of these triggers on you, right? And the same with shadow work, right? And basically, you keep doing this, right? And emotional healing is an ongoing process, right? It's not something that happens once and then that's it, right? It's an ongoing process. Teal describes healing, emotional healing, like peeling back the layers of an onion. So basically what happens is you identify the problem, or you get triggered. You go through the emotional healing process with shadow work and in child work. You heal that issue, or you slowly heal it, and then you come across another problem or another trigger, and then you go through the same process and you heal that, and then once you've healed that, you have another problem. And as we go through life, we develop new kind of permutations of old problems, So the healing process is continuous. It's never ending. So it's a practice that we must learn to integrate into, our daily practice, right? And dedicate ourselves to, right? If we want to keep going into places of higher self-awareness, right? So those are those two processes of shadow work and then child work. Overall, the process of emotional healing is very important because the root of so many of our problems, like all of our problems, essentially, all of our problems that we encounter in life are because of emotional afflictions that we suffered when we were kids, right? So the best strategy is not to ignore them, which most people do, which leads to, just the same problems repeating themselves, and which eventually just ends up as a wasted life. It's better to face these problems now, and if you face these problems, right, even though I said that the process of emotional healing is a very personal one, emotional problems are not unique to you, right? They may seem like they're unique to you, and they are personal to you, but they're not unique to you, right? So what this means is, once you've gone through the emotional process and you've healed an aspect of yourself, you might see someone else who's suffering from the same emotional problem, and then you then have the perspective and the expertise to help them through their problem, which is the same problem as yours. So you can then help people, deal with their emotional problems, right? So, it's not just for you, it's for other people as well. So, very important. But I'm going to be talking more about this as well because, this is an area that I'm very, very passionate about, emotional healing, emotional intelligence, emotional mastery. I think that it is something that is not talked about nearly enough, you know. Even, like I said, even in fields like spirituality, right? It's like, yes, there is an aspect of spirituality that is to do with ideas and perspectives and seeing things differently and telling stories that represent different truths, like universal truths. Yes, that is important, and you know, a lot of people focus on that in spiritual communities. But like, I feel that less people focus on the equally, if not more, I think, you know, well, equally as important area of emotional healing, because it is dark, it is gritty, it is messy. But you know, it's very important because it's how we manifest our reality, right? You know, when I talked about how emotions, how we feel, our sensitivity is ultimately how we manifest. It is the motor in the law of attraction of how we, you know, how we manifest our reality. So it's very important to get how we feel, you know, right. So cool. I hope that's been a hopeful entry. I invite you to, if you have any problems in your life right now, to start to delve into how you feel and give, you know, these two processes a look. And if you want, you can also go to Teal Swan's channel. I'll post a video of her latest video, which is talking about shadow work, and she has some great videos about shadow work. She used to have this this series called Shadow House, where she and some of her housemates would get together and do shadow work on each other. And it's just like, so it's really, really raw. It's really kind of like cringing, because it's like the people talking about their deepest problems, and you can see people just squirming. But it's great. It's just like so raw, you know, and you know, it's really important, right? So I will post a link to her video, and you can go check out her videos. So cool. I hope that was helpful, and I will see you in the next entry. Peace.